Hello, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the head of content at Script, InVivo and Pink Sheet, and we're here in Copenhagen at the BioEurope 2018 meeting, and I'm joined by Chris Huiskamp, who's the managing partner at Sourcia, which is a Dutch-based clinical research organization. I guess the first thing, with the European Medicines Agency moving to or migrating from London to Amsterdam, what's that going to do for the clinical community or the biotech community in the Netherlands?
So I think at least for the biotech community, you see that already in Amsterdam. I think there is a very positive vibe coming from this. I think one thing is, of course, that EMA comes there, which operationally or practically has little difference. But it's much more also, I think, the government locally stimulating this is a good thing. Because that also gives them an urge to further stimulate the biotech community. So I think there is definitely a very positive influence coming from this, and we'll see that, of course, in the next couple of years, how that materializes, but I would actually expect a good spin-off of that as well.
I just thought I'd try and start on a note that actually sort of recognize that there are at least some winners in the Brexit process.
Yeah, definitely.
So, your company, you're a CRO that focuses primarily on supporting the biotech community.
Yeah.
How does that work, and what are the sort of the challenges that you face in that space?
Well, I think to start it off, basically, I come from big CRO, let's say mid-sized CRO as well. So I worked for 2 different CROs before as their CFO at the time, and my other partner as well. So that's also basically where we met. And at the time when we were at conferences where we met smaller biotech companies, which are actually transitioning from, let's say, their toxicology studies into their first phase 1, where they had no experience in clinical studies, they basically actually searched for CROs, and then you end up with like the familiar names, right? And I always ask them, and then they actually work with the big CROs, I always ask them how it's going. They said, well, not really well, because it's such a mismatch between our 5-people company, and a 10,000 euros or 10,000 company people CRO. So that was something which is difficult, and then we thought about this, and this is typically a space which we find very interesting. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of different items and topics going. So I think that's something where we found that there needs to be some kind of different model for the industry to be put in place there. I think let's say the classical CRO pharma model exists for 25 years or something, but there is not really a good fit for small biotech companies. And with small, I really talk about like the 5 to 10 people biotech companies, right?
Yeah. So we're seeing a number of biotech companies go through that sort of transition from being a sort of discovery, research company to being a clinical focused company. But one of the challenges they have is not actually having any clinical ops experience in the first place. So as a CRO, who do you work with in these companies?
Well, we also actually support the fact that we think that you should not build a company, we should build a product, right? And you should build a pipeline. So you should also not focus on building up a large clinical department if you want to run your first phase 1, right? So typically these are small studies, which is between 10 to 25 patients, or healthy volunteer studies. So I think we also support the fact, and we have discussions with our clients, that we would rather take a part of their internal clinical operations department and support that piece as well, instead of them building it up for one study. Often you see that they basically start hiring folks for a study to start in 6 months, and then the funding for the study gets delayed, or something happens in the toxicology piece or in the CMC part, it all gets delayed, and then this clinical department is basically doing nothing, right? So we actually said, well, let's try to keep that a little bit in a flexible shell as well, so we can actually fill in some of the components that normally would do internally. So it's a broader sense than just executing a protocol that we get, right? So it's really something where we do support that part.
So the relationship you have with the biotech is that you almost sort of second or embed Sourcia people into the biotech?
Yeah, I think very often our folks actually work also sometimes at the office of the client. Right? So 1 or 2 days a week, typically not permanently, but we do that also. These studies are the lifeline of the biotech, basically. So if this one works, so they also want to have, access directly to the information, not in like a weekly call, but really on a day-to-day basis. So they're typically very engaged, of course, which is logical because it's their baby and their only source for future existence, typically, right? So they're not starting like a clinical study pipeline, obviously, in most of the cases.
So you mentioned that your background was in the sort of the big CROs who essentially are able to provide all services.
Yeah.
The differentiator is that, well, because you are a smaller company, how many people do you actually
So we have 15
FTEs?
people on payroll,
Yeah, right.
and then we have a flexible shell of freelancers, which is typically CRAs in different European countries
Fine.
that we deploy for certain projects.
So therefore there's a kind of symmetry between you and potentially these biotechs. So I could guess that that's one differentiator, but is there sort of specific parts of the sort of the clinical process that you would say, this is Sourcia, this is what we do? I mean, where's your focus?
Well, basically where we are really good is clinical operations knowledge. So all of our folks have 10 plus years experience, which is also necessary because all of our folks have direct client contact. So, and they need to add value for the client. So you cannot have a junior PM work on a study where there's typically folks that want to have more information, better management and other stuff. So that's really where we thrive on. And I think what we do, which I consider to be a benefit, is that for every different indication that we work in, we actually insource a lot of medical knowledge. So when I worked at a larger CRO, they had their own internal medical experts, but they had it in certain indications. So they typically don't have like 100 medical folks. So we had cases where the oncologist would also work on an HIV study, for instance. I think our benefit in a sense is that you can actually find a very, very good specialized medical expert that is very specifically focused on this field, and you can add those very easily as the medical expert for the study, which makes it a more flexible approach, and you get actually more specified knowledge into the study as well. So I think making that combination and doing that in a very flexible sense, I think is something which really helps us and the client as well to move that.
Okay, and what would you sort of say, what advice would you give to biotechs who are making that transition from being a research vehicle to being a more clinical focused? What's the first thing they should do, apart from signing you up, obviously?
Yeah, logically, right? No, but I do think in the end what people really need to keep as a focus is really that the asset or the value is in the compound, typically in the science, right? So the value is not in building a big company. And we have seen so many cases where people are really hiring 10, 20 folks for the next step, and they're basically sitting doing nothing, laying them off again after a certain while, which is just a very painful exercise, not only money-wise and time-wise. So I really think that in this sense, if you look at this industry, it just makes a hell of a lot more sense to try to find more flexible solutions in that sense and insourcing knowledge in a different way than classical hiring folks.
Okay. Well, Chris, thanks very much for stopping by.
Thank you.
Cheers.